working with mercury here in the mill. I mean, and you know, it just was like everybody scattered. But what I will tell you, because you're always thinking about, oh, the Mad Hatter, you know, in Alice in Wonderland. Well, the Mad Hatter was because hatters in London used mercury to felt wool, make it hard, making hats. And of course, they were breathing it, putting it in their hands, and mercury is a neurotoxin. It's absorbed through your pores. So that's why they called it Mad as a Hatter. But we didn't have any Mad Hatters. And we only had one death in the mill. I mean, doesn't that sound kind of weird?
No.
You know, and it was a guy who fell in a wheel, and it crushed his spine, totally fractured and mashed up his skull. And the death certificate said that he died instantly. I'm sure that made the widow really happy. But anyway, we kind of joke sometimes, well, maybe the death count was 2 here in the mill. So anyway, so gentleman in blue shirt will take everybody down the stairs. We're going to learn how we're going to improve on our return. And if you want to take pictures, you can just take them because I know where you are. Oh, thank you. No. Anyway, now make your way out. Yeah, yeah. See, everything, belts and pulleys here. Sometimes people try and make a shot there. I don't know if you've got too much light
that's
coming
cool.
in. Can I get past you?
Yeah,
I'll
come on.
start talking, and because I get in trouble for going. Okay. We're now in the concentration room. I'm going to pass this around because I don't know if you guys believe me when I said how fine the ground-up rock had to be. That's some of the tailings that came out of this mill. Show me, I'm in Well, it had to get through that 40 mesh because the mercury has to be able to sort of put itself around each particle of gold. And if the particle of gold is too big, it's going to be too heavy and it's just going to keep moving. So anyway, all right, we're in the concentration room. We've only got 60 to 65% of our gold, and our investors are not happy with this. So around the turn of the century, we brought in these machines, and they're called, I call them concentrator tables, shaker tables, and the technical name is Fruvaners. They were named Fruvaners because the man who invented them was an Irish guy by the name of Fru. Doesn't sound Irish to me, but okay. Anyway, so he took the principle of gold panning to process already processed gold and silver tailings. So you know when you dig your gold pan in the stream and you get some gravel, and if there's any gold in that gravel, what happens to it?
Falls to the bottom.
Yeah, why does it fall to the bottom?
It's heavier,
exactly. So these shaker tables basically worked on the same principle. What we did is we pulled back all the tailings that we'd thrown out the front door, the stuff that had clay and tellurides and iron and sulfur and junk that we didn't want, plus some leftover silver and gold, and of course some mercury, and a little bit, not very much. But anyway, and we mixed it back up with water, and then we'd start to pour it on our shaker tables. And the table in the back is the best one to look at because the table was a belt that just went around and around and around. It went, you know, forward. And as that belt went around, these things made it shake sideways. So we were replicating a gold pan as we put water and already processed tailings on that Fruvaner. It shook and it shook. And the gold migrated upwards, and the lesser stuff, like clay, the tellurides, and all that kind of stuff, it went down and went into these troughs here, which we didn't need. Later on, after we were done for a while, we'd scrape the gold off the top of the belt, we'd stop it, and we're like, woo, we've got 20% more gold and silver. Not bad. This was another one of our innovations. We brought it in from Europe because we had all these piles of tailings all around here from other mines, and, you know, hey.
So they would take it from
Yeah, they buy it and lease it, or you might have a pile of tailings in your mine. You could bring it over here, lease it from the Standard, And they run it for
You
2
get
hours. 2 hours.
10 or 15%, and 5% goes to the mill.
Right, and the mill just sits there doing nothing. Yeah. Okay, so we've got 20%. Still not very good. You know, we still want close to 100, don't we?
We're still at 80%.
I know, not good.
I want more.
Oh, we always want more, don't we? And I just wanted to show you, these are the flasks that do you want to pass them around, or are they too heavy? You want to feel how heavy those were? And we put mercury in there, about 70 pounds of mercury in there. And one of those flasks could cost anywhere between $500 and $120.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was very expensive, and that's why we wanted, and mercury is very heavy too. So we wanted to be sure that we constantly reused it. So that's the flask. All right, so here's where Mr. Hoover came in. Around the turn of the century, a Scotsman started working as kind of a scientific experiment with cyanide. And cyanide's an organic compound, nitrogen oxygen and some other stuff, and of course very poisonous. And the Scotsman figured that, well, he heard that cyanide was attracted to precious metals. So he was starting to experiment using cyanide and water mixed up, and he'd throw in tailings and see what happened. And sure enough, the cyanide grabbed out the gold and silver, and he was going to patent the whole process until the Germans came back to him and said, you know, we've been working on this for a couple hundred years, prior art, sorry, no patent. But anyway, cyaniding was starting to be, you know, considered a good way to do a tertiary, a third process of our already processed tailings. That's where Mr. Hoover came in. Mr. Hoover was brought in, and his job was to, I'm going to pass this around. This is one of the mines. One of the very few pictures we have. I don't know why that is. Yeah, and anyway, so Mr. Hoover was brought here because we had put in a cyanide plant, but it just wasn't very effective. And so Mr. Hoover experimented and experimented, and what he was mostly trying to figure out is how little a percentage of cyanide in water he could use, so he still wasn't, what do you call it, poisoning the people, but yet he would still grab the gold and the silver. He finally figured it out once he even drank a beaker of the stuff. It was by mistake, and apparently he turned completely white. And the antidote for cyanide poisoning is hydrogen peroxide.
Oh, God.
I know. So he drank some hydrogen peroxide, and he was okay, but apparently for quite a while, oh my God. What we go through to make gold for our investors, don't we? Yeah? Anyway, see, he had this beaker there, and he was like making a joke. And anyway, let me find this.
It's safe.
Yeah.
Oh crap, that was the wrong beaker.
Yeah, oh crap, that's right. All right, so this is a picture of our cyanide plant. And take a look at the kid sitting on the edge of the cyanide plant before OSHA. Anyway, so he was brought here to perfect cyanide process. And he did. And he figured out 2% dilute solution was enough. So in the cyanide plants, they would take these, now our third time for tailings, pour them in, put a bunch of water in, and swoosh it around.
The stuff that's falling down into here.
Yeah, the stuff we've got in our boxes here. We throw it in. Well, now if you worked at the cyanide plant, now this is 1936. You were did everybody see that? All that? Okay. Let's see. At that point, we would tell people knew cyanide was pretty dangerous, and they knew that employees should be protected. So what they told the employees that they should do is put Vaseline over their arms or wear rubber gloves, because cyanide in solution is caustic. Say nothing to poison. Anyway, so he figured it out. We throw our tailings in there. We throw mix our cyanide in. 2 days later, we throw in either a zinc plate or zinc shavings, like we were in those buckets there, because cyanide likes zinc even better than it likes gold and silver. So the cyanide would go to the zinc or the plate and create this icky black sludge. We just scoop that out, throw it away. And cyanide dissipates, by the way, in sunlight and air. So if you're right close by, you want to have a lot of sunlight and fresh air. Yeah. So he figured he ended up with about, by the time he was done, 98% of the gold and silver that had originally come out of that hill. And of course, at this point, he's figured out the process, and he's become a rock star in the mining world. Immediately recruited out to work for a huge international mining company, and he never came back to Bodie. And he went around the world, and he eventually, Mr. Hoover, Theodore Hoover, went back to Stanford, where he chaired the Department of Engineering and Mining and Geology. So he was really an amazingly innovative guy, and the cyanide process was perfected here at Bodie, and like your wedding ring and your gold chain nowadays are produced using cyanide in solution. That's the basically only way. Nobody uses mercury except in the jungles of South.
So they skip all the other processes, just go straight to this. I was wondering why they didn't do that.
Yeah, because cyanide was so efficient. It was highly poisonous, of course, and like we reuse the cyanide cans here, which we got from Germany, AG Farben Company, which still makes cyanide. Yeah, stick it on the wall, yeah. Yeah. Does you guys know how cyanide poisons you? Okay, a little bit of trivia. Okay, my biochemist brother told me. You ingest cyanide in some way. Goes into your stomach. It forms potassium cyanide in your stomach. Then it goes out, and here's where it kills you. It interrupts what's called the Krebs process. The Krebs process is by which oxygen comes from your lungs to your hemoglobin and goes around your blood. It gets in the way of the red blood cells carrying oxygen. So the first thing that happens when you're not getting oxygen is you go into seizures, and the next thing is you suffocate. So you want to be really careful around cyanide, which is found many places. Apple seeds, peach pits, cut into a nectarine. What you smell is a little bit of cyanide. Almonds. Poison. In quantity. So anyway, so we had to be really careful with the cyanide here. All right. Now we got all this powdered gold and silver, whether we've gotten it from getting the mercury out of it, whether we've gotten it from here or from our cyanide process. So what do we do with it? All right. Pretty simple. We gather up the sponge gold. There's a picture. I have two of these. And let's see. Yeah, and we gather it up, and we put it into this crucible behind this gentleman here. It's a ceramic crucible, and we heat it up to about 2,000 degrees. That's the point at which gold and silver will melt. We heat it up, and then we pour it into the ingot mold that's right there on the floor. Hot job, yeah. And we pour it into that ingot mold, and it's gold and silver together. Because that's the thing you got to remember about here in all the mining camps. It was always their gold and silver together. That's called bullion. Bullion, yeah. Word of the day. So we pour it into there. It cools. It's now about 120 pounds. It looks like silver fillings. We pop it out, and we send about 6 of those at a time to the U.S. Mint in San Francisco. And it weighs about 120 pounds. Nobody bothers to hold up the Wells Fargo stage that first goes east and then goes down to San Francisco. Because, like, what are you going to do with it? And if, like, let's say you rob the stage and you put one of those ingots on your horse, what's going to happen to your horse?
It's got another person on it.
Yeah, you're going to break your horse down. Yeah. So nobody really worried about that. When it went to San Francisco at the U.S. Mint, see, you had to sell your gold and silver to the United States Mint. I couldn't buy a bar of gold from you. No way. Couldn't do it. And because gold supported our currency. So in San Francisco is where they took the ingots and they checked how much gold and silver, and then they melted them down. And there's where, where they separated the gold and the silver at the U.S. Mints. And they used nitric acid, sulfuric acid, some fluxes, and a centrifuge. Gold has one specific gravity, goes off there, silver goes off in another way, and at that point we know how much to pay you who has consigned it. So you can either have it back in coins, or we can credit your account, whatever you want. Sometimes some of the gold and silver did come back in a way in coins because Americans in the West really didn't trust paper money. I mean, you know, if I give you a $20 coin, you know how much you have, right? I give you a $20 bill, what does that mean? Especially, you know, early on when the Confederates were flooding, you know, the world with paper money that wasn't supported by anything. So that's what we did. We came it back and we brought it back here, and we paid all the employees. And we did that for a long time, 35 years. In 35 years, we produced $18 million worth of gold, 4 billion in today's dollars. We shipped over half the bullion that went out of Bodie, and we stayed in business because we were always ahead of the game. We constantly innovated, and we spent money to make money. Does anybody remember what any of the innovations were? The shaker table?
Shaker table.
Somebody say
Electric.
Electricity. Somebody say cyanide?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How about the railroad?
Yeah, the little railroad that went on.
Yeah, the little railroad, yeah. Never took passengers. Yeah. So we constantly innovated. We spent money to make money. Everybody else just went belly up. And we just kept producing and producing and producing. It helped that we had.
When they would go belly up, would this mine then take over the other shaft? Or?
No, not typically. No. Actually, some of the mines were sold by Wells Fargo and for cents on the dollar, and people knew there really wasn't anything left in there. Otherwise, the first owner would have got it. Yeah. So they stayed there. As time went on here in Bodie, Mr. Kane, the guy with the big house, he purchased many of the mines. And like, let's say you wanted to lease the Midnight Mine, and you think, oh, maybe they missed some stuff. You would lease it from Mr. Kane, and you'd go in with your chisels and your whatevers, and you might whack away at the edges of the tunnels. Maybe they missed a vein, and you'd pay him a lease fee based on how much you found. Of course, you do not want to expand that tunnel too far because we have a certain geometry. So, Mr. Kane just made money by sitting around and just collecting checks. But that's why we have Bodie, because he purchased most of Bodie too with his profits. So, answer your question, it got way too expensive to mine here too. We had to pump water at 100 feet. 1881, there's a recession in the United States, a stock market crash, drought. It was so expensive to dig for gold here in the, hard rock mining. Nobody wanted to have anything to do with it. But this one kept cooking until the turn of the century. Anyway, you guys have been very patient. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
That was great.
All right.
That was fun.
Okay, good.
She had that in her pocket.
I've never had a tour entirely in Minnesota. They went to all the different mining camps. They went to Alaska, they went to Colorado. Some of them went to tour and went home. They left. They went to, here, it was a drinking water well. Guess what? It's now our mercury monitoring well. From the EPA.
Really?
And we don't let you go in the basement, which is there's a sub-basement here, because there are mercury fumes that keep coming up all the time, and the EPA tests. And they had to test all of this before they let anybody, come in and go on tours. And that's why you have to stay with us, so we make sure you don't get sick. But anyway, anybody thinks that mining is a benign occupation, think again. No, that was a blacksmith shop. That was a storage shop. See the smokestack thing? This is where they built the gold down, the retort room. That's where we heated the gold up and silver to 2,000 degrees and poured it into the ingot mold. We think the assayer was in here. That was the man who determined. And we think this was a shower room for to prevent people from hydrating, stealing the gold and sticking it in their pockets or putting it, sometimes what they do is they put grease on their hands and then pat some powder and put it in their hair.
Really?
Or stick it in various orifices. It's called hydrating. So now what you had to do is you'd have to take a shower after work in full view of the foreman. And some of the mills even had sub-drains underneath the regular drain because, the water comes out.
So that's like a 5th stage of harvesting gold.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
exactly. But what it would do is, if it, gold washed off of you, you collect that.
How many times did the town burn? Was it twice?
3 times.
3 times.
There was an earlier fire, wasn't a big deal, but the big fire was Two Figs Fire, 1892, and that was all the north part of town. And that burned Bad Body and Naughty over there. The bars and the saloons, most of which, by the way, were already abandoned. And then the 1932 fire started right over there where those two people are. A little kid was invited to a birthday party. The mom served green jello. It was the Depression. He didn't like green jello. So he found a book of matches and started walking around, and he threw a match in the shed and poof. And all the fire hoses were clogged with rocks and mud.
Yeah.
So it was just really sad.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for being with us.